Dust and doubt in Harmony Gulch. Sunbeams fractured by grime knifed through the Harmony Gulch courthouse window, illuminating motes of dust. They spiraled around Lily Mae Bartlett, each particle a spectral accuser, embodying the aura of futility permeating the room. She sat rigid, hands intertwined so tightly her knuckles shone like bone against her worn dress. Harmony Gulch was renowned not for equity, but for its pervasive ochre dust, staining everything a rusty hue, and its palpable air of desperation. The town, a precarious assemblage of dilapidated structures clinging to the gulch's edge, a testament to abandoned dreams of fortune. The courthouse, a squat, rough-hewn edifice, reeked of stale beer, sawdust, and the acrid fragrance of shattered aspirations. Sheriff Brody, his ample girth straining the seams of his uniform, offered his testimony in a monotonous drone. Each word landed like a lead weight on Lily's wavering resolve. He detailed the bank robbery, casting her as a criminal mastermind, a woman of deceptive cunning, all a fabrication born of Mr. Sterling's greed. The banker himself, the town's self-styled benefactor, sat front row, a facade of pious concern etched on his face, but Lily saw the smug triumph lurking beneath. Their gazes met, a flash of victory dancing in his eyes, and a cold prickle raced down her spine. He was a serpent, coiled and primed. "Sheriff, is this the accused?" The judge, a gaunt, aged man perpetually scowling, rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Yes, Your Honor." Lily Mae Bartlett. Found her near the scene, clutching a bag of the missing funds. A full confession followed. Lily wanted to scream out the truth, declare her innocence from the rafters. She had simply stumbled upon the chaos, horrified to discover the bank breached and money strewn about. Gathering a few loose notes, intending to secure them, the sheriff had arrived. Now she was a sacrifice prepared for slaughter. "Lies," she breathed, the word swallowed by the murmurs of the courtroom. The judge's frown deepened. "Silence." Lily pressed her lips together, suppressing the tears that threatened to overflow. She refused to grant them that satisfaction. She must stand firm, for her students, for her parents' memory, for the fragile ember of hope that still flickered within. Mr. Abernathy, her young, visibly unnerved lawyer, rose to cross-examine the sheriff. He was outmatched, outgunned by Sterling's influence and Brody's prejudice. Lily saw the anxiety in his eyes, the tremor in his grasp. His questions were tentative, easily brushed aside by Brody's rehearsed responses. The trial dragged on, a torturous waltz toward a predetermined conclusion. Witness after witness offered damning testimony, echoing Sterling's carefully constructed falsehoods. Even Mrs. Henderson, the baker who had always praised Lily's pies, claimed to have seen her lurking near the bank earlier that day, acting strangely. Despair descended upon Lily like a suffocating blanket. The dust multiplied, swirling with increased velocity, threatening to choke her. Harmony Gulch, once a haven of potential, had morphed into her prison. The faces in the room blurred into a single, hostile entity, eyes filled with judgment and condemnation. She closed her eyes, summoning the image of her classroom, the bright faces of her students, their eyes shining with curiosity. She had aspired to teach them about justice, fairness, and truth. But what example was she setting now? A solitary tear escaped, carving a clean path through the grime on her cheek. Alone, utterly alone, in a town that had abandoned her. The gunslinger represented her only salvation, and he was absent without leave. The gavel cracked, jarring her back to the present. The judge cleared his throat, his stare piercing. "Lily Mae Bartlett," he began, his voice heavy, "do you have anything to say before I pass judgment?" An eastern bloom in the west. The stagecoach groaned to a stop, a cloud of ochre dust blooming around its undercarriage like a summoned djinn. Lily Mae Bartlett alighted, her delicate leather shoes sinking slightly into the sun-baked soil of Harmony Gulch. Adjusting her spectacles, the glare of the western sun bounced off the lenses, creating momentary white spots in her vision. The air, sharp with the scent of sage and something feral, whispered of a life far removed from Boston's perfumed parlors. Harmony Gulch was more a smattering than a town, a collection of rough-hewn buildings clustered as though seeking comfort from the vast, indifferent plains. A scattering of children, their faces daubed with grime and lit by curiosity, spied on her from behind discarded barrels and the shadowed safety of porches. This marked the start of her new world. Her initiation at the schoolhouse proved equally striking. The interior consisted of a single, meagerly furnished room, the air redolent of chalk dust and aged timber. Initially, the students, a mismatched assortment of ages and statures, regarded her with guarded suspicion. However, as Lily began reciting Little Women, her voice pitched in a gentle yet confident cadence, their expressions began to soften. She unfurled tales of distant countries, teeming metropolises, and snow-laden peaks. She unveiled charts and maps, kindling a fervor for discovery within their youthful minds. She illuminated the principles of arithmetic using apples garnered from Mrs. Henderson's fruitful orchard, the sticky sweetness coloring their fingers. She instructed them in the art of penmanship, patiently guiding their clumsy attempts to form letters on their slates. She even introduced them to the nuances of French, much to their delight, and soon the room throbbed with joyous peals of laughter. Before long, the schoolhouse resonated with a palpable energy. The children flourished under Lily's tutelage, their hunger for knowledge unquenchable. Parents, initially doubtful of the citified teacher, began to extol her virtues. They witnessed a transformation in their children, a newfound ardor for education, and a spark of ambition flickering in their gazes. Not all, however, shared in this burgeoning goodwill. Mr. Sterling, the bank's proprietor and arguably Harmony Gulch's most dominant figure, kept a watchful eye on Lily. Initially, he had welcomed her arrival, perceiving a compliant schoolteacher as a means of conferring respectability upon the town. Yet Lily was far from compliant. Her enthusiasm proved infectious, her influence steadily expanding. He observed her interactions with the children, their adoring gazes, her encouragement of their critical thinking. He detected a subtle shift within the town's social fabric, the escalating reverence for learning, the quiet questioning of his own long-held authority. He scrutinized her from the dim recesses of the saloon, a glass of whiskey circling in his grasp, his face a canvas of simmering resentment. He witnessed her frolicking with the children during recess, her hair catching the sunlight, a flash of unexpected grace in this unforgiving terrain. An exotic bloom intruding on the rugged landscape. He muttered under his breath, "She thinks she's so clever, doesn't she?" filling those young minds with outlandish notions. He took a generous gulp of whiskey, the acrid taste mirroring the bitterness churning in his gut. "But this is my domain. I won't allow some fancy schoolmarm to subvert it." He realized he needed to act, to reassert his dominance, to remind everyone of the true power dynamics within Harmony Gulch. The bank robbery presented itself as the perfect solution, a means of framing her, discrediting her, and sending her packing back east. Now, as he watched her stand accused and defenseless, he battled a sudden, unsettling pang of conscience. Almost, however, his unyielding thirst for control triumphed over any nascent stirrings of guilt. The banker's loss, Lily's accusation. The bell above the First Mercantile remained silent that morning. A stifled cough was the last thing Mr. Sterling, the bank's corpulent owner, recalled before chaos erupted in a spray of gunfire and terrified cries. He'd been immersed in ledgers, the musty fragrance of ink and aged parchment permeating his cramped office, when three masked figures burst in. Twin revolvers were leveled at the handful of early patrons and Bess, the solitary teller, barely more than a girl. Their accomplice, a gaunt man whose eyes flickered like caged sparrows, thrust a burlap sack at Sterling. "Fill it," he croaked, his voice strained with a blend of raw fear and unsettling excitement. Sterling, his hands quivering, complied, shoveling bundles of notes and fistfuls of change into the bag. His heart throbbed like a trapped bird against his ribs. Once the sack bulged, the leader snatched it, snapping orders. "Everyone down. Stay put." They vanished as swiftly as they'd materialized, leaving only swirling dust motes and the acrid tang of burnt powder. Still prone on the floor, Sterling slowly righted himself, his face ashen and clammy with perspiration. Behind the counter, Bess was dissolved in tears, while a farmer cradled his wounded arm, blood blooming through his grasp. "We've been robbed," Sterling roared, his voice breaking. Staggering from his office, he scanned the ravaged scene, a growing sense of outrage consuming him. Then he noticed it. A dainty, embroidered handkerchief discarded near the entrance. He retrieved it, his fingers trembling. A meticulously stitched LMB adorned one corner. "Lily Mae Bartlett," he breathed, a chill seeping into his bones. That interfering schoolteacher. Sheriff Brody arrived mere moments later, his expression grave. Sterling, his voice vibrating with fury, presented the handkerchief. "She was here, Brody. I saw her nosing around yesterday, prying into our security. Lily Mae's the only one who goes by that. It's her, I tell you." Brody, a man famed for his measured approach, scrutinized the fabric. "Circumstantial, Sterling. Pretty flimsy." "Flimsy?" Sterling spluttered, his face flushing crimson. "She's a rabble-rouser, that woman. Always fomenting discontent with her highfalutin Boston notions. She likely put those thugs up to this." Brody sighed, his gaze weary. He surveyed the ravaged bank, noting the toppled furniture, the petrified faces. "We'll take prints, scour the vicinity. But this handkerchief, it's insufficient for an arrest. Raid her house," Sterling demanded, his voice escalating. "You'll find the loot there, I swear it." Brody, despite his doubts, understood the need to appease Sterling. The banker held considerable sway in town, his influence far-reaching. He dispatched 2 deputies to Lily's humble abode on the outskirts, while he escorted Sterling back to his office. The deputies returned an hour later, their faces somber. They showed Brody a small, wooden box, discovered concealed beneath Lily's bed. Inside, amid her scant possessions, was a bundle of bills, bearing the First Mercantile's distinct insignia. Brody stared at the money, his jaw tightening. He knew Lily Mae Bartlett. He knew her as a kind, upright woman. But the evidence painted a grim picture. "She's under arrest," he announced, his voice weighed down with regret. "For the First Mercantile bank robbery. A shadow on the horizon." A palpable tension filled the courtroom, the very air tasting of stale paper and suppressed anxieties. Lily, though rigid in her seat, couldn't mask the telltale quiver in her fingers. Her lawyer, his initial fervor long extinguished, delivered a closing argument that faltered and lacked substance. He cited flimsy evidence, her impeccable past, the sheer implausibility of the charges, but his words seemed to dissolve against the rising tide of skepticism he saw reflected in the jury. Their faces, a gallery of judgment, scrutinized her. Some glared with undisguised animosity, others with morbid curiosity, a few with a fleeting shadow of pity. But conviction of her innocence? Nowhere to be found. Thorne, the prosecutor, a man with eyes like honed steel, had portrayed her as a duplicitous schemer, an angel-faced serpent driven by greed. He had twisted her quiet demeanor, her love of books, even her inherent kindness, into damning proof of calculated deception. His resonant pronouncements still lingered in her mind. As the jury departed, a profound quiet descended, punctuated only by the scraping of chairs and shuffling footsteps. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the crushing weight of their collective gaze. She pictured her students, their bright, curious eyes now surely clouded by doubt and apprehension. Had she failed them? Was she destined to become a cautionary tale whispered in hushed corners? Across town, the saloon throbbed with its usual blend of smoke and clinking glassware. Yet, beneath the rowdy din, a new current of unease flowed. "Word is, he's riding in," a weathered prospector mumbled, his voice barely cutting through the honky-tonk piano. "Who?" a younger man asked, apprehension tightening his features. "The shadow," the prospector croaked, spitting tobacco juice. "Heard tell it's 'bout a woman, wronged bad." A tremor of fear pulsed through the saloon. Everyone knew the name, a legend uttered in fearful whispers, a phantom gunslinger, appearing and vanishing like smoke, leaving behind either justice or brutal payback, depending on the teller. He was a ghost in the wind, a shiver down the spine, a reckoning few dare to contemplate. "Which woman's he after?" someone ventured. The prospector just shrugged, his face a roadmap of worry. "Can't rightly say. Just heard he's comin' for her. And where the shadow treads, bloodshed ain't far behind." Upon the dusty ridge overlooking the town, a solitary figure sat outlined against the blazing sunset. Astride a jet-black stallion, the rider and mount were as still as carved stone. The figure's features were hidden by the deep shadow of a wide-brimmed hat, but his very posture emanated a disturbing stillness, a coiled power promising swift action. His gaze swept across the settlement below, settling on the courthouse, a silent observer to the unfolding drama. The wind buffeted him, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint sound of revelry from the saloon. Immobile, a silhouette against the fiery canvas of the sky, he waited with grim patience. As the sun vanished below the horizon, painting the heavens in violent shades of crimson and indigo, the figure on the ridge stirred, a subtle shift, a harbinger of things to come. As darkness consumed the town, he remained. The saloon doors swing open. The courtroom air, thick with unspoken dread, pressed down like a physical weight. Lily Mae Bartlett, knuckles bone white against the scarred table, focused intently on a flaw in the planking. The jury's verdict was already writ large on their faces, a judgment she refused to meet. Grimes, the prosecutor, a man whose features seemed permanently twisted into a sneer, had masterfully recast her as a siren, a calculating woman who'd beguiled innocence into raiding the stage. Fabrications, every last one, yet delivered with a corrosive malice that poisoned the very air. Beside her, Mr. Abernathy, her aging, court-provided counsel, nervously adjusted his spectacles. The faint scrape of glass and metal a stark counterpoint to the suffocating stillness. He'd fought valiantly, but stood no chance against Grimes' poisonous rhetoric and the townsfolk's ingrained suspicion of outsiders. Judge Mallory, his face a study in weathered severity, broke the quiet. Has the jury reached a decision? A wave of stifled breath rippled through the spectators. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, conjuring images of open range, limitless skies, anything to escape the impending doom. Johnson, the blacksmith, a man built like an anvil, rose, his movements betraying a strange reluctance. "We have your honor." The pronouncement cracked the tension like a snapped branch. Lily steeled herself, envisioning the cold stone of her future prison. She tried to resign herself to this outcome, to find acceptance in the face of injustice, yet a stubborn ember of hope still glowed within her. Johnson unfolded the fateful document, his work-worn hands exhibiting a tremor. The silence stretched an almost unbearable pressure. His voice, when it came, was a mere thread. Suddenly, the fragile equilibrium shattered. All eyes flew towards the entrance as twin doors exploded inward, their hinges screaming in protest against the abuse. A wedge of harsh sunlight sliced through the gloom, illuminating swirling dust. Framed in the portal stood Ethan, the shadow Cole. Unchanged, yet altered. He wore the same familiar duster, the same gun hung low on his hip, and the same haunted depths resided in his gaze, reflecting endless miles. But an undercurrent of raw power, a honed purpose, radiated from him like the heat of a branding iron. A palpable unease rippled through the room. Even Judge Mallory seemed momentarily unsettled. The sweet anticipation of justice soured into acrid apprehension on every tongue. Ethan crossed the threshold, his spurs a subtle percussion against the wooden floor. The doors whispered shut behind him, the encroaching darkness amplifying his presence. He moved with a predator's economy of motion, his gaze sweeping the assembly, briefly pausing on Lily before locking onto Judge Mallory. A profound hush settled over the room. Johnson stood motionless, the verdict suspended in his trembling grasp, utterly forgotten. Only the faint sigh of the settling doors broke the silence. Ethan's voice, roughened by sun and grit, cut through the quiet, a low rumble that spoke of vast distances and desperate battles. It was a voice that commanded obedience, a voice that had quelled riots and silenced the wicked. "This farce concludes now. I am her husband." A communal intake of breath silenced the courtroom. Lily staggered, clutching the rough table edge for stability. The room spun, the wood's texture a blurry landscape beneath her trembling fingertips. Could she have understood correctly? The shadow. Ethan, her spouse? Mr. Sterling's face, crimson from his summation, twisted into a mask of incandescent fury. "Objection. This is preposterous. A blatant play for sympathy. This fraud should be sanctioned." He slammed the prosecution table, the reverberation echoing in the stunned stillness. The judge, typically imperturbable, stammered, his gavel suspended uselessly in his grasp. "Mr. Cole, is it? Explain yourself. What is the meaning of this declaration?" He peered at Ethan over his spectacles' rims. Ethan remained serene, a stark contrast to the pandemonium he'd ignited. He stood unyielding, his attention locked on Lily, dismissing the judge, the enraged Mr. Sterling, and the muttering townsfolk crammed into the gallery. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. "I am her husband," he stated, his voice a deep timbre that sliced through the burgeoning clamor. "We wed a month past, beyond this court's jurisdiction." Lily's thoughts raced, struggling to reconcile this avowal with the man she believed she knew. He had been a guardian, a confidant, more than that, a feeling she'd hesitated to define. But a husband? How? When? Memories of shared moments in the cabin flickered, shared meals, hushed evenings, the magnetic pull binding them. Had she been so utterly oblivious? Mr. Sterling, regaining his equilibrium, curled his lip. A month ago? How incredibly opportune. This is clearly a fabrication, a last-ditch attempt to deliver a guilty woman from the gallows. The gallery exploded. Murmurs escalated into shouts, accusations hurled like stones. Sarah Miller, her expression a blend of disbelief and triumph, clutched her Bible tighter. Jedediah Blackwood, the blacksmith, punctuated the chaos with the thud of his cane, demanding order. The judge, finally finding his voice, hammered his gavel, a futile attempt to quell the riot. "Order. I demand order." The sound dissolved in the bedlam. He glared at Ethan. "Mr. Cole, do you possess any verification of this nuptial? Any documentation whatsoever?" Ethan's gaze flicked to the judge, his eyes like honed flint. "Proof enough," he uttered, his tone a dangerous undercurrent. He reached inside his coat, and Lily's heart leaped into her throat. Was he drawing a weapon? Had he come to free her by force? Instead, he presented a small, exquisitely carved box of wood. Opening it, he revealed twin silver rings, dulled by age yet retaining a subtle gleam. He raised them for all to witness. These belong to my mother, he revealed, his voice softening, revealing a hint of vulnerability. Given to her by my father. They were joined by a traveling preacher in the mountains. Unrecorded, but a marriage nonetheless. I gave one to Lily when we exchanged our vows. Lily remembered. The night after the conflagration, bathed in moonlight, he'd slid the ring onto her finger. She'd been too overwhelmed, too consumed by the moment to fully comprehend its weight. She'd perceived it as a promise, a symbol of their bond. She hadn't recognized it as a wedding band. She glanced down at her hand and there it resided. Mr. Sterling scoffed derisively. Rings? Anyone can acquire rings. This is circumstantial at best. It proves absolutely nothing. He waved a dismissive hand. It's a charade. A deception. Ethan ignored the interruption. He fixed his gaze upon Lily, his eyes delving into hers. I am her husband, he restated, his voice ringing with resolute conviction. And I will stand with her. A web of lies and truths. The air in the holding cell tasted of stale iron and despair, a film coating Lily like the grime on her threadbare dress. Since the jury's departure, she'd remained mute, her focus lost somewhere beyond the steel bars. I spoke with Brody, the shadow murmured, his voice a gravelly rasp against the heavy silence. He leaned against the chill of the stone wall outside her cell, worry carving deeper lines into his weathered face. Told him you were with me that night. Far out on a mountain lion track. A slow blink brought Lily's gaze to him. You fabricated the truth. Not an accusation, merely acknowledgement. I did what was necessary. The shadow's jaw clenched, a muscle ticking. Deception tasted like ash, particularly aimed at her, but the alternative painted a bleaker picture. A cough sliced through the strained quiet. Mr. Sterling, his usually ruddy complexion now a pasty gray, hovered awkwardly at the corridor's end, Sheriff Brody a looming presence at his back. Cole, Sterling managed, his voice tight with suppressed agitation. A word, if you please. The shadow straightened from the wall, his eyes narrowing to slits. Concerning what? Your alibi. Sterling visibly swallowed. The sheriff has inquiries. Brody advanced, his expression unwavering, steady. Mr. Cole, you've testified that Miss Bartlett accompanied you on a cougar hunt the night of the robbery. Is that accurate? It is. The shadow met Brody's scrutiny head-on, his own gaze unwavering. Sterling emitted a short, humorless bark of laughter. Cougars, Cole? Honestly? You expect anyone to swallow that? A renowned gunfighter whiling away the hours hunting wildcats with a woman. The final word dripped contempt. I couldn't care less what you choose to believe, Sterling, the shadow's voice rumbled low with warning. It happens to be the truth. Does it? Sterling advanced a step, a disturbing spark igniting in his eyes. Or is it a carefully woven fiction to shield something? Perhaps something of considerably more value than a handful of coins. His gaze flickered pointedly toward Lily's land, a fertile oasis amidst Sterling's sprawling, parched holdings. Brody's eyes narrowed, tracking the exchange between Sterling and the shadow. Years of acquaintance with Sterling had revealed a ruthless hunger for expansion, a bottomless appetite for land. A seed of doubt took root in his mind. The shadow's hand instinctively twitched towards his revolver, then relaxed. He refused to grant Sterling that satisfaction. Are you leveling an accusation, Sterling? Merely highlighting coincidences, Sterling's voice dripped with an almost palpable venom. A sudden robbery, a conveniently timed alibi, and a parcel of land I've been diligently attempting to purchase suddenly vulnerable. He dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief, the gesture belying his carefully constructed composure. Lily observed the unfolding drama, her silence amplifying the tension. She understood Sterling's covetous desire for her land. It clarified her mother's stubborn refusal to sell even in the face of adversity. Brody stepped between the two men, his hand resting casually on his pistol grip. That's sufficient, Sterling. I appreciate your concern, but I'll conduct the investigation. He turned his attention to the shadow. Mr. Cole, I'll require a more detailed account of this cougar pursuit. His tone remained polite, yet his gaze held a sharp, analytical gleam. He wasn't entirely convinced. As Sterling was escorted away, sputtering with indignation, Brody turned back to the shadow. That was a right courageous tale you spun, Cole. But I've known Sterling a long while, and I recognize opportunism when I see it. Brody scratched his jaw, his gaze settling on Lily. You're safeguarding her. I understand that much. But I'm beginning to suspect you're sheltering her from more than just the long arm of the law. The shadow remained silent, his face an impassive mask. The truth or its twisted semblance in this complex situation was a dangerous weapon, and he wasn't yet prepared to unleash it. Justice in Harmony Gulch. The courtroom atmosphere was thick enough to taste, a blend of stale sweat, gnawing anxiety, and the saccharine aroma of perfume worn by women eager for a spectacle. Lily Mae Bartlett, rigid as a china figurine, awaited her fate. Only the stark whiteness of her knuckles betrayed the turmoil within. Ethan, the shadow Cole, a brooding figure at the rear, radiated a contained menace. His gaze locked on Sterling, a bloated tick gorging on stolen land, and a simmering rage ignited within him. The jury's absence had stretched into an eternity. Cole, meanwhile, had been busy. First, Silas, the scrawny ranch hand who'd claimed to see Lily with a knife. A hushed conversation behind the livery. A flash of steel under the twilight sky, and Silas recalled the fading light, the distance, the possibility of mistaken identity. Then, Mrs. Higgins, the village gossip, who swore Lily had issued threats. A brief kitchen visit, a demonstration of Cole's cutlery skills on a particularly unyielding root vegetable. And Mrs. Higgins remembered the angry words belonging to someone else entirely. The linchpin, however, was Jebediah, Sterling's foreman. He was a man sculpted from granite and etched by hardship. Jebediah had been the toughest, but Cole had unearthed his soft spot. Martha, his wife, worn down by years of Sterling's exploitation. Cole painted a future for Martha, free from Sterling's grasp, new land, a chance to breathe. He detailed how Sterling would bleed them dry, then discard them. The foreman broke, revealing Sterling's machinations, the predatory land grabs, the manufactured droughts, the trumped-up charges against anyone who stood in his way. Sterling craved dominion over the valley, and Lily's patch of land was the final prize. Back in court, a pin dropping could have been heard as the jury re-entered, their faces impassive. Farmer Johnson, the foreman, rose and spoke. "We find the defendant, Lily Mae Bartlett, not guilty." A wave of astonishment rippled through the room. Lily's head jerked up, disbelief etched on her face. Sterling's features twisted into a mask of fury. Before he could unleash his wrath, Cole moved forward, his voice a deep resonance that hushed the room. Perhaps Mr. Sterling would care to illuminate the methods by which he acquired his holdings? Perhaps elaborate on how he persuaded his neighbors? Sterling sputtered, his face darkening with apoplexy. "This is slander. Lies." Cole's eyes burned into him. "A lie that you diverted water from the Bartlett's creek? A lie that you intimidated Mrs. Henderson when she refused to relinquish her orchard? A lie that Jebediah witnessed you doctoring deeds?" Jebediah, ashen-faced, gave a hesitant nod. A restless murmur surged through the onlookers, escalating in volume and indignation. The vice of fear Sterling held on Harmony Gulch had shattered. Sheriff Brody, clearly bewildered, finally spoke. "Sterling, you're coming with me." As Brody escorted Sterling away, the crowd surged forward, a tide of relief and righteous fury. Lily, still reeling, felt a gentle hand close over hers. She looked up into Cole's dark eyes, glimpsing something indefinable. "It's finished, Lily Mae," he murmured, his voice a low rasp. "For now, at least." The air in Harmony Gulch retained the lingering scent of dust and dread, but a fragile, nascent hope had begun to bloom. The beginning of a new story. The gavel's final thud still vibrated in Lily's chest, a ghostly echo competing with the burgeoning wave of relief threatening to overwhelm her. Not guilty. The words tasted strange. A forgotten melody hummed in her ear. The throng, a volatile entity moments before, now dissolved into scattered groups, offering mumbled apologies and hesitant congratulations. Ignoring them, Lily focused on the retreating figure of the man who had irrevocably altered her life. He stood near the livery, shrouded in shadow despite the afternoon light. "The shadow." "Ethan," she called, her voice fragile as spun glass. He turned, the familiar severity of his features eased by something unreadable. Perhaps liberation? Hatless, his brown hair caught the sunlight, highlighting the fatigue etched around his eyes. "Lily," he acknowledged, his voice a resonant murmur. She halted a few feet away, the space feeling like an uncrossable chasm. "Why?" she asked, the word scraped raw from her throat. "Why did you do all this?" He paused, then angled his head toward a secluded corner of the stable. "Let's speak in private." Inside, the pungent aroma of hay and equine filled the air. Ethan leaned against a stall, arms folded, a posture of rigid defensiveness. The shadow is just a fabrication, he began, his gaze fixed on the trampled straw. A persona I adopted out of necessity. He met her eyes, the sheer intensity making her pulse quicken. My name is Ethan Cole. Cole. The name struck a chord, a faint echo from a long-ago tale her father had spun. My father knew you, she breathed, the dawning realization a physical blow. He spoke of a debt owed. Ethan's jaw tightened. Your father saved my life, Lily. Years ago, when I was adrift, I vowed to repay him. He asked me to watch over you should fate turn against you. And this, the sham marriage, the entire deception, this was how you intended to fulfill that promise. It was the only path I could discern to shield you. The rumors, the accusations, they were poisoning Harmony Gulch against you. I needed to inject doubt to give them pause. Lily scrutinized him, struggling to reconcile the ruthless gunslinger with the man who had gambled everything for her sake. But why not confide in me? Why shroud everything in secrecy? He winced, a nearly imperceptible flicker. My past is not a tapestry I wish to display, Lily. I didn't want you to know the darkness I've inhabited. Silence descended, thick with unspoken truths and unanswered inquiries. Lily shattered it. What now? She asked, her voice a thread. The trial is concluded. The town accepts our story. What happens to us? Ethan's gaze swept the stable, encompassing the dust motes pirouetting in the sunlit shafts. We could vanish, he suggested, his voice devoid of inflection. Disappear into the unknown. Start anew somewhere untouched by our past. But Lily shook her head. Harmony Gulch was her anchor, the repository of her father's memory, the echo of a life she was unwilling to relinquish. And something else, an undefinable pull drawing her deeper, anchoring her to this place, to this man. No, she declared, her voice firming. I'm staying. Not anymore. Surprise flickered in the depths of Ethan's eyes. Are you certain? Yes, she affirmed, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. We remain. We will forge something meaningful here. Something genuine. A slow smile unfurled across Ethan's face, transfiguring his countenance, smoothing the harsh angles. It was the first authentic smile she had witnessed, and it stole her breath. Then we stay, he echoed, his voice husky with emotion. And we will make this marriage a reality. He reached out, his hand grazing hers. An unexpected jolt, undeniable and potent, surged between them. Lily didn't recoil. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with his, the rough texture of his calluses a stark contrast to her own soft skin. The dawn of a new narrative. Terrifying, exhilarating, and irrevocably, palpably real.